Hello friends, welcome to part 2 of the Great Reset. 10 days ago, we started with the Great Reset, part 1. But now we move to part 2. I've got very important information for you to reveal here to you. In the scriptures in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it talks about the rise of Antichrist, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the great political leader that's going to rise to power in the very last hour. It speaks there in verse 7 concerning the mystery of iniquity. What is the mystery of iniquity? If we understand the mystery of godliness, which is God manifest in the flesh, then we will understand the mystery of iniquity. It is Satan revealed in the flesh. It is his man placed in politics amidst the economic and religious scene of our world, rising to power amidst the confusion of the last days. We know if we look at the history books concerning the rise of Hitler and Nazi Germany, how out of the confusion of economic chaos, that man rose to power from the end of the 20s up through the 30s until he brought the Second World War to bear right across Europe. I want to assure you again that I believe that out of an economic crisis, we are going to see a political and religious and economic system arise upon our world, the likes of which we have never seen before. This is part 2 of the Great Reset. You'll know that 10 days ago I dealt with part 1, and just a few days ago, little did I realize, a friend pointed out to me that next week on the 2nd of November, the Time magazine is going to be publishing the next edition of their magazine, and it's called The Great Reset. I don't believe it's an accident that they're printing and publishing that on the day of the election between Trump and Biden in America. You see, in that magazine, it actually has one article depicting what our economic world is going to look like in 2023 and how we solved over the next 2 years, how we solved the economic situation. They say in that particular article, the U.S. began its new approach to things after November the 3rd, when Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump. You see, Time magazine believes that the election in America is even tied into the Great Reset. Now I know I've at least got my American friends, have got their ears as we begin to deal with the Great Reset part 2 here. It is timely that we have been dealing with it and are dealing with it again. You'll remember last time in part 1, we looked at the World Economic Forum and how it has been used in this crisis this year. I believe the crisis of COVID-19, of the race riots, of all that's happened through this year is a smokescreen to hide what is about to happen. Even the election that's going on in America, that is not the real issue of the hour. I believe behind that is an agenda and something coming forth, the like of which most do not realize in this hour. The World Economic Forum was founded in 1971 by Professor Klaus Schwab. He actually was born in 1938 in Hitler's Nazi Germany. Germany at that stage was a police state, a regime built on fear and violence, on brainwashing and control. It arose out of an economic crisis in Germany. The Third Reich arose, planning to establish its dominion for 1,000 years. Now, Klaus Schwab is now 82 years old, and I'm not in any way inferring he is anything. He certainly wasn't a supporter of that system. Yet we're seeing something the like of which we can't imagine happening in our day. I'm talking about the Great Reset, and here especially the financial crisis that is just about to hit our world in a way that we little realize. Back in July 1940, Hitler's economic minister called Walther Funk unveiled the German plan for a financial new order before an audience of journalists. This plan for the future Nazi world of the Third Reich would involve tying all the currencies of different nations, whether those nations were conquered by Germany or freely joined them. All of Europe was going to be tied together with a joint economic system, and they would have a clearing office in the city of Berlin through which everything would pass. By this means, the gold reserve would be rendered unnecessary, and they would detach gold from the economic system across Europe. Hitler was promising a new stable economic world which hadn't been there to those nations that would join with him. Now you may ask, what's that got to do with the Great Reset? I'll get there. Just give me a moment. We dealt with last time about the fourth industrial revolution, and how Klaus Schwab released his book in 2016, and that the World Economic Forum are emphasizing the vision of a fourth industrial revolution, which is the fusion of the physical, the digital, and the biological. In other words, everything is going to be digitalized. Everything is going online. Everything is going to be unified in this next digital industrial revolution. He also released a book in 2020, just a few months ago, called COVID-19, The Great Reset. In other words, Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum tied COVID together with the Great Reset and showed how the COVID crisis of this year is going to initiate and bring in the Great Reset across our world. Saints, I am not saying this. This is the political, financial leaders of our world are talking about this openly and freely. Well, he's got another new book that he's going to bring out next year called The Global Reset, the case for stakeholder capitalism, showing how that a socialist system is going to replace Western capitalism. In other words, they're going to transform the economy with this reset. As we begin to look at this great reset, the system or the organization that will be used on worldwide change of our economy is called the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And I want to deal with this here because it's utterly fundamental to what is just about to happen in the economic crisis that we are going to hit. The managing director of the IMF has actually called just a few weeks ago for a second Bretton Woods. I know some of my terminology may be foreign to you, but I'm going to explain myself here. She actually stood and announced a new Bretton Woods moment is here. And she talked about an economic calamity that they must deal with in the days ahead in the light of COVID. What was Bretton Woods? Let me explain. It was a conference held for 3 weeks at the end of the Second World War. It lasted for 3 weeks and was held in July 1944. 730 delegates from all 44 Allied nations gathered together in America in a hotel in a place called Bretton Woods. The Big Four were the main leaders of this gathering: the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and China. They were the leading voices within it. And these nations gathered together to change the economic global aspect of our world. 2 men led that gathering and influenced it greatly and created an economic plan that has affected our world all the way down to today. The first man was called John Maynard Keynes of the United Kingdom. The second was called Harry Dexter White of the United States. And these 2 men brought together and brought forth a plan that was going to change the economics of our world. First of all, John Maynard James, who was he? He was an English technocrat in the 1930s, would hardly have been heard of or noted, and yet he rose to a position where he was going to change and affect the economics of the world. In July 1940, as I just said, Hitler released his economic plan for the world to join together all of the different currencies. In November of 1940, that same plan was sent to John Maynard Keynes for him to actually discredit it. But as he began to read this Nazi plan for the economy, he actually come to conclusion it was an excellent plan, and he accepted 3/4 of it. You see, at an earlier stage in the early 1930s, he actually wrote a book called The Treatise on Money. It was about a supranational bank currency or money. In other words, a currency to come into our world that was higher than any national currency. In other words, bank money that would be global or international. He actually went on as he looked at this Nazi plan and began to put together a plan for the British government. He connived a plan concerning an international bank and an international currency called Bancor. He spoke of a supranational police force that would actually enforce this economic system. He talked about a future economic government of the world. And he presented this plan in 1941 to 43 to the British government through white papers, and it was accepted. What about on the American side? Harry Dexter White was the second most important person in the Treasury. He received a phone call in December 1941 from the American Treasury Secretary, who was his boss at that time, Harry Morgenthau, who later was going to serve as chairman of the Bretton Woods Gathering. Well, he phoned him late this night, and he actually told him, he said, I had a strange dream last night concerning the end of the war and about an international currency with a central fund to administer it. And he actually asked White, do you think this could be possible, that we could have an international currency? Well, White set himself to produce a post-war plan. And the strategy very similar to Keynes on the other side of the Atlantic. His world currency was called Unitas, or UN for short. So these two men, Keynes in England and White in America, at the very same time had devised a plan for a world economic system to change it after the end of the war. Both of these men got to see each other's plans in 1942 and to study it. In 1943, Keynes and White met face to face for the first time to merge these two plans. America and Britain bringing together and merging this plan. If you haven't heard this before, I know it's shocking, but it's historically true. And they were met together to merge these two plans to create a world currency. But they knew they had to be careful about the average man on the streets hearing about this, or there would be no room for it. They kept it under wraps and discussed it behind closed doors. But this information got leaked to the Financial Times, a national newspaper, who then released information about it. Immediately, America shelved the plan for a world economic currency that would be offered to the nations of the world at the end of the Second World War. At that time, in 1944, as they had to merge their plans in that time in the hotel. And what they done at Bretton Woods was their plan was to heal the world economy. But now they were going to have to compromise because the plan was let out of the bag. So what was the compromise? There's two things. First of all, they created the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and we're going to say more about that. Second of all, they created the World Bank. Both of these institutions were based in Washington, D.C., on the same road opposite each other. World currencies were going to be attached to the American dollar, and the thought of a world currency was set aside for the moment. Do you realize that presently in the IMF boardroom in America, there are 2 busts as you walk through that building of these 2 great leaders, Keynes and White, who actually raised up these institutions that have affected our world since then. Keynes was a practicing homosexual behind closed doors. White, who was the American representative, actually became the first director of the IMF in 1946. However, he soon resigned from that position once he was accused of being a Russian spy. In fact, he had had contact with communist spies in America for 10 years, since 1934. The FBI had been investigating him, and here he is, the first director of one of the most powerful financial systems in our world that wanted to bring a world currency to the nations at the end of the crisis of the Second World War. He had been passing for some years files to the Russian government. And in fact, he was a great supporter of the Russian socialistic economy. He praised it and admired it. And he said the socialist economy of Russia, it works and it is preferable to anything that American capitalism can produce. Here is this important man molding our future world economic system. And yet he was a spy in hiding with an agenda. Do you know there was other spies at that same time? For example, the senior editor of Time magazine from 1943 through to 48 was also a Russian spy, given much information back to Russia through his magazine. In fact, his name was Whittaker Chambers. Through the Time magazine, he promoted the UN. At the very same time, Alger Hiss, another American, was the first Secretary General of the United Nations. He basically created it. He wrote the charter, and he handpicked certainly the American representatives who were going to first work in the UN. He also was exposed in 1950 as a communist Russian spy. Saints, I'm telling you something very fascinating here as we approach to look at how the IMF are going to bring about the Great Reset in this hour and this generation. I'm just giving you the background like I did in part 1, and we'll maybe get further information in part 3 of these messages. The IMF was then held forth as an institution that would come in to help nations after the Second World War to get them back on their feet. If they were in debt, if they were in trouble, the IMF would lend them money. That was the idea behind it. In 1964, the IMF returned to Keynes' ideas more than White's, an international currency, and they actually called it special drawing rights, or the SDR, which has been set in place since that time. Then in 1971, the world has regularly called for a second Bretton Woods. In other words, to go back and re-establish this original vision of Bretton Woods of a world currency. It's only 2 weeks ago that the IMF again stepped forward and called for a second Bretton Woods in the midst of this crisis as the answer to the economic tragedy that is about to hit our world. Until the year 2000, very few people thought or considered the IMF. It wasn't seen as being of any consequence to the average person like you and I. But that all changed in the year 2007 when the financial crisis began in New York City in America. Then the following year in 2008, the financial crisis hit the world stage. It literally crippled banks around the world, including Ireland, where I'm speaking to you from. From that very time, 2008, world experts have said the economy, the world global economy, has been on a life support machine. Others have said it died in 2018. Literally, after that crisis, $20 trillion was pumped into the world economic system just to keep it afloat. World banks, the IMF, and all the rest become very central in this. You see, the banking system cannot exist without trillions being poured into it just to keep it existing. Do you realize the crisis that happened in 2007, 2018 has basically sacrificed the world economic system as we knew it? Let me prove and show what the IMF had to do with this and how it's just about to affect our world again. Let me give you an example. In 2008, the IMF loaned $200 billion to Greece. This was actually the largest amount ever lent in history to a bankrupt state here in Europe. Can you imagine it? It was actually called a crime against logic. But this is what the IMF does. Here is a bankrupt nation that can't even pay its previous debts, and yet they are loaning it an extraordinary amount of money which will never be paid back. Even since 2008, banks around the world have been printing money without limitation. Now, what is the IMF and how is it going to affect our world in this 2020 crisis that we're passing through? The IMF found itself after the 2008 crisis right back at the center of the world financial stage and also the political stage. Quote, overnight, it was transformed into the most powerful economic, political institution on the planet. By November 2009, it had lent $85 billion to 18 different countries in our world, and it promised another $80 billion to 3 other countries. Do you know how the IMF operates? It literally operates like a spider's web. Once you get caught in it, you'll never get free. The more you pull against that system, the deeper and deeper you go. For years now, for decades, they've gone into South America, into Africa, and into Asia, lending money to nations that could not pay it back. And the more they try to get out of it, the deeper they go into debt. That same year, 2008, the EU and the G20 nations undertook to raise the IMF financial resources to $750 billion. At the G20 gathering in 2009, they discussed issuing a supranational world currency, a world currency above all national currency, as the answer to the crisis. And in fact, they decided to give power. They empowered the IMF to be able to issue such a currency in the future. Do you see where all of this is going? Money is power. In exchange for financial aid, the IMF gained substantial control over the economic policies of nations. In the countries that they lent money to, they began to lay down laws and regulation that affect the entire politics of that nation. In other words, you begin to very quickly lose the sovereignty of your nation. By the end of 2019 and over into January 2020 of this year, listen closely, the world's total debt rose to $250 trillion. Or let me put that another way, 322% of the GDP of the world. That's a record high. What do I mean by that last statement? It's 322% of the GDP. What the world can put out in a year, what it can earn, the finance it can raise, what it can sell, and the money it can bring in. Do you realize the debt rose to 322% greater than anything the world can put out. That means the world is so deep in debt, it can never get out of it. It can never get out of it. And you have the IMF coming in on nations, especially from 2008, and they're weighing down nations with greater debt, with interest on what they're loaning, and they're beginning to bring regulations in saying, you must do this in your nation, you must do this in your nation. This is what it was like just before the COVID crisis of this year. I am revealing to you that much of what is happening this year, the COVID-19 crisis, pandemic, is a smokescreen for a financial crisis that is about to hit our world in a way that you can't imagine. You have not seen anything yet, I can assure you. The pandemic is a cover for an economic reset. And the World Economic Forum and the IMF are going to be fundamental in this financial reset. Why is it these institutions that have been fundamental in shutting down the world for this pandemic and who say we cannot open our economies, we must close business, we must shut down our economic functioning in our nations. These same ones are the ones who are saying they care most about the economics of the world. They are responsible for shutting down the world economy as of March 2020. Never has the world economy come to such an abrupt stop in all of its history. Never. Do you realize just this year the UK was expected to borrow about £55 billion for this year as their debt increased? But already this year, since this crisis began, they have borrowed £208 billion. What about Germany? Already since March, they have literally loaned 500 billion. What about Ireland? They have loaned 24 billion. That is 171 million euros a day since this crisis began. What about America? America is more in debt than any other nation. At Bretton Woods, America was the richest nation, and the United Kingdom was in a financial crisis. It was the country most in debt in that hour in the world. Great Britain was, and it lost its place in the financial market. Now America is more in debt than any other nation. At the beginning of this year, it was $21 trillion in debt. And yet this year, through loans to manage this crisis, it is going to further $16 trillion into debt. Can you imagine this? I hope you're seeing something of this picture, that these financial institutions like the IMF are standing there stepping in to help nations in debt. The IMF in June 2020, this year, listen to what they said. This is a crisis like no other, and the recovery is very uncertain. From the beginning, the IMF has warned, from March time, they have warned that this is the mother of all financial crisis. Now, let me return again to the World Economic Forum and Professor Klaus Schwab in his book called The Great Reset, which he connected to COVID. This is the great financial reset that they want to bring about. They say this is the answer. Do you see what this crisis this year has caused? It has actually set the stage for these institutions to step in and say, we have an answer. And you know what? It's going to initiate the fourth industrial revolution where everything changes, and they combine biology to the computer system. They want to put microchips. They want to join these computers to our biological system and to our brains. Listen to what Schwab says in his book, The Great Reset. Quote, "The global economic catastrophe that we are now confronting is unparalleled in world history. He could only compare it to the end of the Second World War or the Great Depression at the end of the 1920s. Again, he goes on to say, quote, history shows that epidemics had been the great resetter of countries' economy and the social fabric. Why should it be different with COVID-19? In other words, he said COVID-19 gives us the opportunity to reset the whole economic realm of our world, as well as the very fabric of society. He goes further, quote, if this goes on for a long time, it's certainly going to be the mother of all financial crisis. He goes on again, saving lives, talking about saving lives versus the economy. In other words, in his book, The Great Reset, he says, saving lives is more important than saving the economy. So while they emphasize a pandemic and a health scare, and you know, I'm sure you think the same as me, it is greatly exaggerated, and that's a great underestimation of words. But why are they doing this? Do you realize these men are trying to force an economic crisis, the like of which our world has never seen in living history? If the economy, the global economy, has been on a life support machine since 2008, I promise you that the World Economic Forum, the IMF, the UN, the WHO, and other institutions are literally pushing the bed of the world economy to the edge of a cliff to shove it over. They are creating a crisis, and you know what? They're going to blame it on COVID-19, what's just about to happen in our world. Klaus Schwab, in his book, The Great Reset, goes further, talking about employment will probably worldwide rise to 25%. He predicts that 60% of businesses in our world will close permanently, never to reopen again. This is his prediction. He says that 50% of jobs that we are now familiar with will disappear totally. I mean, the actual kind of job will go, never to be used again. And those jobs will be taken over by robots and machines. He goes further in talking about this great reset, that 85% of jobs that are going to be operating in the year 2030, just 10 years away, are not even created as yet. This is the fourth industrial revolution. He is talking about a global crisis that requires global governance. Do you realize I believe that here we have the smokescreen of COVID-19, of the coronavirus, of the race riots, even the election in America is not really what is happening. While everybody's eyes are on these things, and rightfully so, I know, there is something. All of that is to hide the Great Reset, which is a new economic system. But with that economic system, they want to bring the downfall of capitalism. They want to bring to end the national sovereignty of different nations. They want every nation deep in debt. And they want to begin to rebuild the world according to their master plan, the fourth industrial revolution. Do you know what this is? This is a corporate fascism. It is a fascist economic coup, the like of which our world has never seen. It is the global consolidation of power in few hands. I believe all of this is setting the stage for the rise of Antichrist, for the rise of the last global world government that's going to be regionalized into 10 different regions of the world, maybe with their own economic system, but all joined together and put in the power in the hands of a few men. I'm talking about an hour that we're just about to hit where we're going to experience hyperinflation on a global scale, something the like of which most of us listening have never seen before. It's going to be the global economy out of control, a global recession in which all the nations of the world, and especially governments, are going to be very open to manipulation. There is going to be offered to the world a new money system, a cashless society, a digital system. I believe we're on the verge of a universal digital currency controlled by the IMF. You may say, I don't believe that. Well, do you know in America there's a plan just put out in recent months of an 18-step plan on how to go cashless that's going to be worked on from January next year? If you knew all that was going on behind the scenes while we're caught up with this crisis and with masks and all the rest of it, if only you realized what they're planning to bring in. They keep talking about debt cancellation, but not your debt. The debt of individual governments. But whoever cancels that debt, that government will be indebted to them. They talk about major wealth transference or the redistribution of wealth. This statement, and you'll hear more about it, the redistribution of wealth doesn't mean that you, Joe Bloggs, are going to get money in your hand. Oh no. This is a socialist, communist idea. It is power over wealth. And I believe this is often heard this year by everyone, the Catholics, the communists, and the charismatic false prophets in America. I've heard them all talk about the redistribution of wealth. What is it? It is this new reset financially. Something is coming. And it would shock you if you really knew what it was. A new tax system, a world tax, a lifetime tax, and something else. As I close here, I've got so much to say and no time to say it. In part 3, I'll go further in this great reset. But I'm telling you, saints, Christians, those that love Jesus Christ, we're just about to be faced in the next year, year and a half with a financial crisis. I don't know timescales. I'm telling you what they are saying. They are planning on what COVID-19 is being used for. I don't want you to be in the dark. I don't want you to think it's about an election between Trump and Biden. That's only a part of it. I don't want you to think it's about race riots or masks. It's certainly not about a pandemic, I can tell you. It's more a plandemic, but it's not that that was planned. It's the plan that is behind it that is so serious. I believe as believers, never should we be seeking the Lord like in this hour. I wanted you to know these things. And one thing I ask you today, are you born again, walking with Jesus Christ? Are you filled with the Holy Spirit? Is your life right? Is your house in order? This is a remarkable hour. And saints, I believe for one moment of time in this economic crisis that is about to hit the world, we have an opportunity like the early church. Those Roman roads were set in place. The Greek language, that Roman currency, that whole Roman Empire was set up at the right time. And the Lord sent a Pentecost to a small gathering of believers in an upper room. And from that upper room, they went everywhere preaching the gospel. But now, at the end of the age, we're coming down to the final thing. And maybe the Holy Spirit is going to hijack what is being set in place for Antichrist system. And it is coming. And I believe we're right on the verge of all of these things. But before that, I believe the Holy Spirit, one last outpouring of the Spirit, one last missionary movement, one last evangelization of this generation. It is time, and we are going to get the opportunity while the IMF are going to step in with their plan to stabilize things and to offer to cancel the debt. I believe we've got the real answer. You must be born again. Your security is not in money or finance. Mammon will fall in this world. But I promise you, the only security, the only hope is the Lord Jesus Christ. God bless you here. I've got so much to say, too many words, too many thoughts, but I just try to condense this for you so you understand what is going on. God bless you, friends. I'll come back in part 3.